First of all, we're going to look at determining what is relevant. So that is that first step. And with regard to relevance, there are three key things that are really important to think about. An ESG review is like, what are you doing already? Thinking about strategic things. Do you have strategy already in place? Actions, targets, policies, reporting, anything sustainability, ESG related you might already be doing. Just having a good overview of that is really important. Equally, what should you be doing? So what are some of the things that are required? And that could be investor requirements, data requests. It could be compliance that's already there. Think NGAR. Could be upcoming legislation. Think about ASRS. Could be another number of things there that are really key things you should be doing. And the question then is, maybe you are doing them, maybe you're not doing them. So they could cross over with that list that you are already doing. It could be requirements that are likely to come in quite soon. The next step then is to do a materiality assessment, and that is really working out which sustainability areas or ESG topics are most important to your organization. So that's really focused on what is material, what is relevant to your business. And then ultimately, once you've done those things, look at that gap analysis. Compare what you already do and, compare that with what is important. So really kind of looking at that and considering that strategic and that compliance perspective. What are some strategic things I want to be doing, should be doing, and that I'm already doing, and the same for that compliance perspective. So we'll look at these components in a little bit more detail in the next few slides. So first of all, on the relevance, that ESG review. So what are you already doing? And then it could be a whole number of things that you are already engaged in or thinking about or have plans on. Could be that you're already being scored or rated and you're trying to improve your scores. Could be that you already started carbon accounting, looking at your greenhouse gas emissions on scope 1, 2, 3, all of them, or maybe the first two. With that, it could also mean that you've done some work already on setting greenhouse gas emission reduction goals. Targets, you might have made a net zero commitment. You might have an annual ESG or sustainability report that you're compiling on an annual basis. With that, or separate from that, you might be disclosing on particular ESG standards. And common ones you might have heard of are GRI, SASB, TCFD, CDP, and there could be a whole range more. There's many out there. These are the ones that are quite common there. There's also a lot of industry-specific ones. You might have had data requests from clients, investors, supply chain information, your requests or questionnaires you need to answer and that you are doing on a regular basis. You might have focused on ESG policies for compliance regions, modern slavery, or just to manage your supply chain, do human rights due diligence. It could be a whole range of policies, could be around diversity, equity, inclusion, a whole range of things that you might already be involved in. So on that, what you're already doing, really start thinking about these things and just make a list of what you're doing. And then on the right-hand side, what should you be doing? So you might, if you are kind of crossing the threshold for NGAR reporting there, that's something you might be doing. So that's really about, again, carbon accounting and reporting. The Australian Sustainability Reporting Standards are coming up. Part of that will be really focused on climate, implementing TCFD, the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. It will be a version of IFRS S2, international standard. We'll look at that in a little bit more detail a bit later on, and that's something that is going to come into place quite soon. As I flagged, the EU CSRD is also something to look at. Is that something you should be doing or should be, at least looking at? And then managing and disclosing your material ESG topics. That's also something to keep in mind. Is that something I have to do or I want to do? There could be a lot more things on that list. So it's really important to do that review and see where you are. And with that then, once you've done that, it's also really important to work out then, if we think about sustainability and ESG, those three pillars there, put them here with some ESG topics around that. Now, if you look through that, you might see topics that you feel like, oh yeah, that's definitely important to my business. That would be relevant, important, or in other words, material. We would have to report on that because that's something that our investors really want to know. But also it's an area that we have impact on people, planet. So that's an area that's really important to us. There could also be topics in here that you look at and like, I'm not sure. Maybe, maybe not. And there could be topics in here that you're almost certain that are just not touching your business because it's very specific. Now, with all these topics here, it really depends how you slice and dice the topics, how you frame and label them, but there are hundreds of them. Hundreds of different topics there sitting across these three pillars. Now, you can't do everything, and not everything is relevant. And that's where that materiality assessment comes in. It is all about going through a process, through an exercise, the assessment, to work out which of those topics are important to you, which of them really cross that threshold where you start to have to disclose information. And it could still be from a voluntary perspective, but it could also be from a mandated perspective. So it really depends on if this is part of your voluntary or your mandatory reporting. But that exercise that we see, that materiality assessment, is really now becoming best practice, if not the gold standard globally for doing ESG reporting, but also thinking about sustainability at large. And we'll see a little bit later how this feeds into those key areas. If we then look at that gap analysis, what we've done now is we've worked out on the left here, we see there's a list there of topics under environmental, social, and governance, and I've highlighted 3 of them. So this is just an example list of a company that has done a materiality assessment that worked out there are 3 environmental topics that are material. There's a number of social and a number of governance topics that are also material there. And with those topics now, I need to focus on what am I going to do with this list of topics? How is that going to actually then help me? So if we take here, for instance, first carbon emissions, from a goals and targets perspective, strategically, you could say, well, we've made some commitments already. Net zero by 2040. We're going to cut our scope 1 emissions by 50% by 2030. So there could be some goals and targets already that you can, when you do that gap analysis, say, hey, that's something we're already doing. And you link that then directly to a topic that is material to your business. You can also look at your operations and your practice, like on the action side of the things you're doing actually, which is linked to this topic again, and likely also linked to those goals and targets, which could, for instance, be replace all diesel generators with solar arrays and batteries. So in doing that, you could actually bring down some of your GHG emissions and meet those goals and targets. Ultimately, then, you also want to report and disclose on where you are in terms of those carbon emissions on that topic. So you could be disclosing annually your GHG emissions in scope 1, 2, and 3. Now, then also, you want to look at from a compliance perspective, what is coming up there. I've now worked out that a particular topic, carbon emissions, is material. There are a few things I'm already doing here. And then there is, from a compliance perspective, there's NGAR, which I might or might not fall into. I need to look at their thresholds. And there is ASRS coming in with that climate standard I flagged S2, where there are also different thresholds that you might or might not be affected by the regulation. So this is really kind of a good way of taking all that information, the things you've collected, the things you're already doing, the compliance that is coming, and your material topics. But you could also find then, if we quickly look at employee development, that you don't have any strategy or goals or plan in place, but you suddenly realize now this topic is material. On an operational level, we have no budget line really here. We do some ad hoc training. So there's not a lot happening there yet. And hence, in terms of your disclosures might ask you to disclose the total hour of training for employees a year, or by gender, but you don't have those numbers because you're not tracking it, because you're not doing it, and you haven't set any strategic goals or targets around that. You're looking at compliance, you might find, well, there's nothing particular at the moment, but in the future, ASRS S1, which is more general kind of requirements, might become mandated as well, or I might decide to report on that on a voluntary basis. So let's keep that in mind as well. And then ultimately, we'll take data protection and cybersecurity. You might, again, here's an example, say, well, we don't have any data protection strategy or plan in place. We have started our SOC 2 certification in terms of the operations, but we have pretty limited voluntary disclosures on data security incidents. And again, you look at compliance, what do we need to do there? So this is a really good way of doing that gap analysis to really work out what's relevant, what's material, where are we as a business, and what's coming our way.